Back when it still existed, E3 was essentially the gaming industry's equivalent of Christmas. On the one hand, there's the excitement of seeing announcements for new upcoming games and consoles that fans have been dreaming of, but on the other hand, there's a risk of being set up for severe disappointment if those wishes don't become a reality, or the potential of creating embarrassing moments of pure cringe. However, I want to talk about an example of a presentation that, for me, knocked it out of the park in almost every way imaginable. Hey, how's it going everybody? I hope you're all good. My name is Peter Gargan, and as you can tell from the thumbnail, I'll be talking about why Nintendo's digital event for E3 2014 is still one of my favourite presentations they've ever done. I figured it would be appropriate, as it has now been 10 years since this event was aired online. Scary to think about how time flies. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So, right away, we start off with these animated skits that were made in collaboration with none other than Robot Chicken. Wait, what? Robot Chicken? The very same Adult Swim series that is notorious for skits that put dark and disturbing twists on various things that defined our childhood, working with family-friendly Nintendo? This is certainly an interesting timeline to be a part of. Anyway, our boy Reggie, whose presence at Nintendo we still miss dearly to this day after his departure in 2019, walks on stage, and after the announcer comically pronounces his surname wrong, he drops the first bombshell of the show and confirms that there will not be a new Mario game being revealed. Although we probably should have emphasized main series Mario, as there were at least 3 Mario-related announcements in the presentation, if we're going to be technical. But I digress. I was already laughing at the self-awareness of the audience member sarcastically expecting it, as I found it so relatable to when people would complain that Mario is all Nintendo ever does, while ignoring the plethora of more niche and diverse IP they have under their wing. But what really elevated it was the fact that Reggie literally burns this guy alive with a fire flower when he brings up Mother 3, a topic which we all assumed that Nintendo would just refuse to acknowledge, but here they are, openly joking about it in an official presentation. This was pretty surreal stuff at the time, trust me. I also liked seeing the Nintendo characters interacting backstage, with Link being hopeful that he could replace Mario as their mascot, before scolding his tomb self. Some of my other favourite skits that were distributed in between announcements was Little Mac trying to pour himself some coffee with his boxing gloves still on, which naturally doesn't end well, and an awkward confrontation between Bowser and Peach on who gets the last donut. These added a fun level of personality to the characters that you don't normally see in official material. It's the kind of humour that is typically reserved for dialogue-heavy titles like Kid Icarus Uprising or the various Mario RPGs, so it is more than welcome here too. The opening skit alone is a shining example of why Nintendo made the right call by releasing a pre-recorded video in favour of the traditional live press conferences being hosted by the other publishers, as it leaves less room for embarrassing errors that could get memed into the ground, and Nintendo themselves have fallen victim to this in the past when they did things the old-fashioned way. So despite their reputation for being behind the times in the industry, this was one of those exceptions where they actually thought ahead by taking a more efficient approach, and it's interesting to see the other publishers now following this trend in recent years. Now, let's get into the actual announcements. We start off with Reggie and the late but legendary Iwata having a scrap that results in the announcement of Mii's being featured as playable fighters in Super Smash Bros., which was cool to see, as Sakurai previously rejected them from Brawl over concerns related to bullying, and the atmosphere the trailer established with Reggie and Iwata going at it in what seems like a dark room was just electric. It also doubled as the first ever look at amiibos, which are still a part of Nintendo today, so you could argue that this trailer was a pretty historic moment. This would have been around the time when the hype for Smash 4 was at an all-time high too, so naturally it had a big presence early on in the presentation, and its impact would come back later on. But we'll get to that in a bit. Moving on, we saw further details of Yoshi's Woolly World, a game that I still haven't played and haven't had that much interest in, but it was very well received when it was released, so I guess it was a welcome presence at the show. The more the merrier, I'd say. We see some developer insight on the creative process of the behind-the-scenes work, which is always fascinating to hear about, and it was done in a concise manner that didn't feel like it dragged on for too long, which is also the case for the other developer stories featured in the rest of the presentation. After that, we saw the reveal of Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, essentially the Captain Toad levels from Super Mario 3D World being expanded into a full standalone game. It was a bit of a surprise announcement, but one that made so much sense due to the potential those levels from that game had in terms of being iterated on, while also giving Toad his first role as protagonist since Wario's Woods back in the 90s. I still look back on Treasure Tracker as one of the more overlooked games Nintendo has put out over the past decade, and still to this day have wanted to see a sequel. Maybe for the Switch 2, or whatever console they're working on next? Now let's get into one of the biggest announcements, being the initial reveal of what would eventually manifest into The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game that is often credited for changing the trajectory of the open world genre, and considered one of Nintendo's most influential titles in the history of modern gaming. It's crazy to think about how it was originally slated for a 2015 release, as it got delayed into early 2017, and despite vividly remembering that feeling of frustration, seeing it getting constantly pushed back, I'm kind of glad in hindsight that it happened, as the final game turned out to be a generation-defining landmark title, and if it was released sooner, who knows if it would have made that same kind of impact. One trailer for Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire later, I'll be honest, I skipped ORAS, so I don't really have much to say, but it was certainly hype for Pokemon fans regardless. We got to see more of Bayonetta 2, a title which initially faced controversy due to being announced as a Wii U exclusive when the original was only available on PS3 and Xbox 360. Not to worry, as it was obvious Nintendo was aware of the risk of alienating their fans, so they announced a Wii U port of the first game to be released alongside the sequel, complete with Nintendo-themed costumes so that we could be up to speed. This was honestly a genius move, and now Nintendo seems to be the new home for the Bayonetta series going forward. Not to mention her eventual inclusion in Smash Bros., and Bayo 2 serves as yet another positive development in the blossoming relationship between Nintendo and Platinum Games after the wonderful 101. We get another developer story with the return of Eiji Aonuma for further details on Hyrule Warriors, confirming Zelda as playable, as well as fan favourite Midna to join Link and Impa in the cast of Zelda All-Stars to choose from, followed by the confirmation of Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, a successor to Canvas Curse on the DS, which utilises the Wii U gamepad for similar touchscreen gameplay. While I didn't play the former until its definitive edition on Switch, I also never played Rainbow Curse to this day, so I don't really have an opinion. But Xenoblade Chronicles X would follow up and grab my attention. At this point in time, Shulk wasn't confirmed to be in Smash Bros., so speculation of his inclusion reached an all-time high following this new trailer of Monolith Soft's spiritual successor to the then-overlooked Wii RPG. I was one of those that had yet to play a Xenoblade game, but the original had always been on my bucket list of stuff I wanted to get round to playing, and this new Wii U entry looked just as interesting. Fast forward to today, and I still haven't finished X after all these years. Man, I need to get round to that. Also to this day, it remains one of the few first-party Wii U exclusives that have yet to receive a port on the Switch. But with the Switch's successor seemingly around the corner, it will probably be reserved for that system at this point. So here's hoping that Xenoblade Chronicles X will eventually break beyond the Wii U's shackles for wider exposure. Following on from that, we saw the reveal of the original Super Mario Maker, an entry that made the novelty of creating your own custom 2D Mario levels much more accessible to the general gaming audience beyond the fan-made ROM hacks we've seen over the years. Both the Wii U original and its Switch sequel have since become popular games to cover in the Let's Play corner of YouTube, due to the practically infinite amount of content available due to users getting to share their creations online. And it also made sure that the gamepad was being put to good use. Next up is quite possibly one of my personal highlights, as those who watched the digital event live at the time got to witness the birth of Splatoon unfold before their very eyes. A developer story being filmed at a gorgeous aquarium explores how some of Nintendo's younger staff formed the creation of what would eventually become the longtime publisher's next big hit, and I vividly remember being curious on how this new IP would fare. It also served as a big middle finger to those who constantly criticised Nintendo for allegedly milking the same ideas over and over again, as Splatoon provided a fresh take on the online shooter genre that was being done to death during the past couple of console generations, which typically had gritty aesthetics in depressing war settings, but swap that with Squid People hybrids shooting colourful ink, and it proved to be a winning formula and is now up there with the likes of Mario, Zelda and Animal Crossing in terms of Nintendo's current biggest franchises. The penultimate announcement takes us back to the world of Smash Bros. To confirm Palutena from the Kid Icarus series as a newcomer, a reveal that I remember being ecstatic over. Even without a camera pointed at me, my 14-year-old self pretty much reacted the same way you see a lot of YouTubers and streamers react when they see their desired characters get revealed, as there was a point in time leading up to Smash 4's release where Palutena was actually my most wanted character, due to Kid Icarus Uprising being one of my favourite games of all time, and because Sakurai served as the director of both games, it only made natural sense that Kid Icarus would get a significant boost in representation, and Palutena was the obvious choice due to being the secondary protagonist of the franchise. I was also just a fan of her as a character in general, and the trailer itself was awesome, seeing an anime-styled fight sequence between Link and Pit before her divine intervention, with dark Pit tease sprinkled at the end, whose inclusion wasn't explicitly confirmed until the game's actual release, but his presence in the trailer was vague enough to keep fans guessing. And last but not least, we get a closing message from Miyamoto, who assures us that he was continuing to find new ways to make the Wii U gamepad enhance gameplay experiences. And although on the surface, it didn't seem like anything big, a closer look at what he was actually playing reveals that he was sneakily confirmed a new Star Fox game without outright stating it. This would eventually be known as Star Fox Zero, which most Nintendo fans probably already know, ended up with a mixed reception, but at the time of its announcement, we didn't know how it would turn out, so the prospects of a brand new entry in the Star Fox series was actually really exciting at the time, especially after the Mother 3 audience guy mentioned it in another skit halfway through the presentation before Reggie zaps him with a laser beam from his eyes, a reference to the fils-aime skit that was used when announcing Nintendo's E3 plans earlier that week. Considering the series' dormancy since Star Fox Command on the DS, not counting the 3DS remake of Star Fox 64 in 2011, it ended up being one of the Wii U's most anticipated titles for quite some time, and while the end result may not have met the expectations of the majority, it was still nice knowing that Nintendo were at least willing to make a new entry. Overall, E3 2014 was an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan, despite the struggles the Wii U was going through, as it served as a beacon of hope that Nintendo could turn things around with some of that system's best titles all being covered at around the same time. And while it ultimately wasn't the Wii U saviour that I hoped it would be, it doesn't change the fact that the presentation itself was filled to the brim with the level of charm found during the Wii U and 3DS era that the Switch generation has often been criticised for lacking, and I really hope to see the vibes it provided being brought back by the time we see the Switch's successor. Anyway, that just about does it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed reminiscing. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was this Nintendo's best put together presentation, or do you think they made a better one on a different occasion? I'd love to hear what you have to say, so let's get a discussion going. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more videos on the world of Nintendo or other topics of interest. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see you later.